So you're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on the Salford Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, bringing you all the news from all the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate on this show to have world-class athletes, sports people, footballers, people involved in sports in all walks of life, from the media to coaching to all sorts really. And today we have a fascinating guest, and we spoke a few months ago with one of our guests about the importance of keeping the momentum going in women's football when we have a major tournament, be it the World Cup and the European Cup. We see as a nation, England, we get behind the team and it's fantastic, and the home nations in big tournaments, Wales, Scotland, we all get behind the team, and we've seen big attendances at Wembley. We've seen the game grow, but it's really important that the momentum comes along, and we'll get an insight into the sport and how things are going. Obviously, the pandemic has had a big impact, and health is absolutely most important. And at the time of this, it's a pre-record, we're in lockdown and isolation, so please do bear that in mind, because things change pretty rapidly. So the whole idea of the show is to sort of bring you an insight into people's careers and what they do, and obviously the future of the sport that they're in. So Jordan Gard, the Managing Director of the Women's Sports Alliance and Generation Sports Solutions, and Gard Design Solutions, as well as being a footballer for Yeovil Town as well. Jordan Gard, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi Jimmy, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board, Jordan. And women's football has been making big inroads over the last few years. Tell us your sort of perspective. I mean, what inspired you? I mean, hopefully we can inspire a generation of listeners listening in. Not necessarily going to get to the level that you've got to, but even if they sort of get out there and just play for enjoyment, recreation and getting active. And what inspired you to become a footballer?
Yeah, absolutely. I started when I was quite young. I was 6 or 7 years old. I had two younger brothers at the time that I could kind of kick a ball around with in the garden. I mean, it was a constant joke in my family that, there would always be a ball at my feet from even a younger age than that. So I always seemed to have a passion for football. I'm not sure where that came from. I mean, my dad was a big fan of football. My mum, not so much, but hopefully that's changed now. But I'd always have a ball at my feet. I'd always be playing, and I'd always want to kind of join my first club that I joined when I was 7 years old. And unfortunately at that time I absolutely loved it, but there was no girls teams. The girls team that I played for disbanded. There wasn't a lot of teams around at that time, and so I had to stop playing, and that was when I kind of got involved in the coaching side of the game, to try and stay close to it. But I didn't start playing then again until I was 16. So that was a long period of time where I had actually out of the game. But I always wanted to be close to the game, hence why I went to coaching to stay involved. But, playing was always my passion. But watching it on TV, there wasn't too many female role models that I could look up to. So I always wanted to be a Paul Scholes or a David Beckham. But obviously that wasn't, there were no women's professional teams at that time, only in America. And I had an interesting conversation with somebody who reached out to me and said, did the film Bend It Like Beckham inspire you to play? And actually thinking back, it did. That was the first time when I saw females playing in the professional game. And so that was really interesting to think back and think about how that kind of movie inspired me to play football and think that I could be professional.
Absolutely, that's really interesting stuff. And I mean, many years ago, when I went to America to do some coaching, this is a long while ago, and I've been obviously on a number of occasions for one reason or the other since, but at that point I specifically went out there, and it was pretty big. Women's football was pretty big at that point, so in one sense I sort of feel that they have in America a bit of a head start in terms of their own development, because this is sort of like the mid to late 90s where they had really well established at least university teams. Is that sort of a fair assessment? I know you've had experience of working in America as well, in terms of, are we closing the gap, do you think? What's your take on it, Jordan?
absolutely. When I was growing up, that was the dream, was to go to America, and I managed to go there in 2012. I went to Florida on a scholarship program, and that was where everybody wanted to be. That was where all the UK female footballers wanted to be. I think it was huge. Now it is still huge, but the game has grown so much in the UK. It's kind of flipped it on its head now. There are less girls wanting to go out to America on these scholarship programs, and there are more Americans now wanting to come over to play in the Super League in the UK. So the tables have completely turned, and that's really, really interesting, because I was out there in Florida and I had the most amazing time there. I was only there for a year. I was supposed to be there for 4, but unfortunately it didn't work out in the way that I would have hoped originally. But everything happens for a reason, and I came back, and the women's game wasn't where America was in terms of the professionalism, but it is getting there now, and it's on par, and we're getting more and more American female players wanting to come over here.
Absolutely, the prestige of playing in England and the UK and Europe, so to speak, I think is huge as well. And we see sort of the men's game in the Premiership, and it gets beamed around the world, and we probably could go to all 4 corners of the globe and see someone wearing a Premier League shirt somewhere of some sort. And in terms of the game growing, it's come a long way in England for sure, and the UK. How much further do you think? I mean, are we still progressing? Where are we at the moment, do you think, Jordan, in terms of developing the game? Are we sort of moving along quickly, or are things sort of incrementally? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's growing massively. Like I said, it's grown hugely in the past 5 years. Nobody would have ever expected it to grow this much, and those who did, you would have laughed at them if they said that originally. But the way in which the game is growing is at an absolutely massive rate. And sorry, what? Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, no, just in terms of the growth of the game, it's sort of, what's it like, say, outside the tournaments? We hear a lot about the game when you've got the European Cup on and the World Cup, in terms of, say, crowd attendances and along those lines. Is it increased number of people coming to watch week-to-week games, or?
Yeah, absolutely. The sponsorships as well that have been pumped into, especially the Super League, and that's done wonders for women's football. Underneath the Super League, so the Championship and the national leagues, that money is that those sponsorships are yet to be pumped into that. So there is a massive gap between the Super League and the Championship and the National League. If we can close that gap slightly, it will do wonders for women's football in general in the UK. The Super League, like I said, the game attendances are rising every week. The sponsorship money being pumped in is rising all the time. I mean, Barclays have just announced their sponsorship of the whole entire league, which is amazing. We kind of need the same for now the second tier and the third tier. Yeah, and
absolutely. I mean,
but in the current pandemic at the moment, just before this all happened with the coronavirus, the women's football was growing massively, and it was kind of reaching a kind of all-time high, and then we've had to stop everything for a while, which we hope that women's football isn't going to go back to square one after. We need to make sure that the sponsors are, pumping money into women's football when we come back from all of this, because the worst thing that could happen is we were on a high before this pandemic, and now we've come to a halt and it goes back to square one. We need to try and avoid that and pump as much money into women's football as we can.
Absolutely, because we're hearing a lot about how it's going to impact the Premier League in men's football, and obviously the pyramid of football professionally and non-league. I haven't heard, maybe it might be just me, but I haven't sort of heard too much, and I'd like to sort of share it and get it out there, the impact it's going to have on women's football too. I think it's really important that that's taken in consideration as well. There's been some great tournaments. England's done really well in the last few tournaments as well, and the league's really developed, and hopefully, like you said, it's really important that we can build on that and keep going. Obviously, at the moment, health is a priority, and that's the main focus. Beyond that, hopefully the sponsorship does continue, because it's certainly come a long way. In your own journey, when you sort of first began playing, have you sort of seen, from a development point of view, would you say, I mean, you mentioned sort of your role models growing up, you sort of mentioned, I think, Paul Scholes and along them lines, but going forward, I mean, are there more sort of women role models, would you say, Jordan? Is there more and more women sort of role model players that, say, and someone just starting the game can look up to? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. There are so many huge female role models in the game now that, these young girls coming through are having people to go and watch. They're having female footballers going to watch. And that's the most important thing. Social media is a huge aspect of women's football right now. All these professional women football players in the UK and the WSL, they are all over social media. Their followings are growing every single day, and women's football is a massive family kind of event. That's kind of the vibe of you go to a football match and there are tons of kids there, tons of their parents there, tons of school kids all going together on kind of school trips, and that's kind of the environment. So all these girls are now looking up to and following all these professional women's footballers on social media, and kind of aspiring to be them that way. When I was growing up, social media didn't exist, and so we would just look at the TV and think, what can we see on the TV? Who can I aspire to be that I can see on the TV? Still, women's football isn't massively on TV. There are apps and things like that, so we're kind of figuring out different ways to get it out there. But like I said, social media is doing wonders for growing the game and having role models to look up to. And unfortunately, on social media, we have some idiots who take it too far and comment bad things and negative things about women's football, which isn't helping at all. But the majority of the stuff is really, really positive, and especially for these young girls growing up to, aspiring to be a female footballer, they have these role models that they can look up to and see on a daily basis. Their training regimes and what they eat, the whole professionalism of the game has massively grown.
Absolutely, and I think that you made some really interesting points there. And there'll be parents listening in and young people listening in, wondering about not just the sort of benefits of being a footballer and being in that sort of community and just being the best you can be, but also you seem to take in confidence from being a footballer and transfer that into your business life as well as the managing director of the companies that you are. And has that been beneficial to you, Jordan, sort of the confidence you've sort of gained from being in that sort of environment and being good at something and being around that sort of positive environment? Has that been something that you've transferred to business too?
Absolutely. I played at a very young age and I absolutely loved it. It wasn't until I was about 16 that I really kind of found myself. Really, I went to a futsal football college, and that's when I played every single day, and that's when I think about my life really starting. That's when I kind of found the people that I want to be around. That's when I found what I love, basically, and that did absolutely wonders. It brought me out of my shell, and it made me kind of feel included in something, which did amazing things for me. And after 2 years there, I went off to America, and that was a huge step in my personal development. I had to learn how to be by myself, play in a different country, meet new people, and that really, really took me out of my comfort zone. But actually it did wonders, and when I came back from there, I was a different person. I was a lot more confident. I knew what I wanted or how to get what I wanted in terms of business or football, and meeting people that I kind of vibe with, which really helped me. I think without sport, I couldn't tell you where I'd be. I have no idea what I would have loved as much. Yeah. But absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's made me extremely determined, and it made me realise that actually, if you want something, you have to work really, really hard to go and get it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting stuff. And you mentioned America there, and the facilities in America at university level are generally outstanding. And what was your experience like in America, like in terms of the college, the facilities, that sort of environment? And what would you describe your experience as being like out there in general, Jordan?
Yeah, it was hot.
Yeah, Florida, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It was absolutely brilliant. The whole lifestyle that the Americans lead is completely different to how it is in the UK. Everybody that I met in America was so friendly. They were so outgoing and passionate about women's football, which was amazing. The professionalism of the game out there when I was there was second to none. The facilities were fantastic. You would never have kind of like molehills or bobbly pitches. It would all be sweet 3G or grass pitches, with stands, and the fans that they attracted were huge. So it was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. Unfortunately, the coach that I had out there wasn't what I was used to, and so that kind of made it a lot harder for me. I had to adapt really, really quickly.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was a really, really positive experience. Not just for my football. I think over in America they play a lot more, powerful, speed, fitness football, whereas over here in the UK it's slightly more technical, I believe. But I think the technical aspect is the game that I enjoy more than the kind of physical running kind of aspect. But yes, when I came home, I had that kind of experience under my belt, and it really, really helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great point, and a life experience too. Being out there in a different culture, different environment, certainly is a good opportunity to sort of become the best version of oneself, where you can sort of go out there and sort of testing yourself, obviously on and off the field too. That sounds like a really fascinating experience in terms of your own development. In terms of your own sort of company, I mean, what's the sort of focus on there, Jordan? I know you do a few things, and what's your goal and vision for what you do at the sort of the Women's Sports Alliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So the WSA, we set that up in the end of January. So at the end of January this year, we started the Women's Sports Alliance, and the ultimate aim is to grow women's sports and to develop women's sports. So we aim to protect, support and enhance any elite individuals involved in women's sports. So whether that be a male coach or a female athlete or a male sports psychologist or a female sports psychologist, anybody in and around women's sports can be part of our membership club, and they can have access to a whole range of our brand partners and membership benefits to kind of help the professionalism of the game and help these individuals have the support and protection that they need.
Absolutely, that sounds really, really interesting. Definitely, and certainly, if you feel free to mention the website. Jordan, is there a website you've got at the moment?
There is, yes. The website is www.the-wsa.co.uk.
Yeah, no, definitely, that's really interesting stuff. And in terms of, say, obviously you've been through it, you've sort of played since an early age, and just in terms of, say, women's sport, or focusing on football, what's it like? I mean, getting involved as a participant. What's the sort of how does one go about it? Say our listeners are probably wondering, what can they do to get involved to play football? What are some of the things that they can? Do they just Google it, or are they sort of clubs, or how do they sort of go about getting involved, Jordan?
I would say social media is a massive help. On social media, there are all the youth clubs are on there, I would say. But yeah, if you type into Google, whatever city you're in, I don't know, say Salford Girls Football Clubs, and they will all be listed there. Also, you can go onto the FA website or the FAW if you're in Wales, and they will have a whole list of clubs that you can get involved with there. Also, get in contact with any female role models that you have at a club. Say, for example, if you're based in London, and you go and watch London City Lionesses, for example, if you send one of the players, say Ellie Mason, a message on social media saying kind of what female clubs are around, they will have lots of different contacts that they can get in touch with. But there are loads of methods. I would say social media is probably the biggest one, where all these female clubs are on social media. So if you give a search, type into the search bar, female football club in Salford or wherever you are in the world,
absolutely.
It's that way.
No, for sure, and obviously, every different city and county will have its own teams and so on and so forth. And what about, say, people who sort of have a dream of maybe playing at the very top of the game, or sort of getting as far as they can, and in the game itself? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it difficult to do that in terms of getting to professional level? Obviously, there's not as much sponsorship at the moment, but what are the challenges you think in terms of trying to go professional?
I would say that it is possible now. If somebody had asked me this years and years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I'd have said, it's very difficult. There's no money in the game. There's no way that they would be professional athletes. But nowadays, it is so possible. It's difficult. You have to work really, really hard. You have to have the right people around you. You need to eat right. You need to sleep right. You need to drink lots of water. You need to train right. You need to manage your body really, really well, and your social activities. But it is possible. It's more possible than it ever has been before. And so it's really, really important that if you do have that as a dream, you should know that it is possible if you work hard enough.
Yeah, and absolutely. And in terms of yourself, your own experience, I mean, you obviously showed initiative and sort of went out there and got involved. And I mean, for men and women, or women and men, it can be, daunting, so to speak, in terms of going to a club, especially at a young age, a young boy or a young girl sort of going along. And what sort of advice would you give? I know it's hard to give advice, but say you were speaking to younger self, so to speak, maybe someone early teens or a bit younger than that who feels a bit sort of apprehensive about going to a team. What would you say to anyone listening in terms of, if they're a little bit afraid of sort of going to a team, that how it's going to work and sort of what to expect and so on and so forth?
I would say absolutely just go for it. The friends that I met from playing football at such a young age are my best friends now. If you don't want to be professional, that's absolutely fine. Still go, because the people that you'll meet there, you'll meet so many new people, so many friends that can help you later on in life. There's such a team environment in women's football, even from a very young age. And it's really important that, if you're scared to go, or if you're not too sure, you go and try it. I would have loved somebody to have told me, 15, 20 years ago, don't worry about what anybody else thinks. Just go for it. Go and enjoy yourself. Go and have fun. Go and meet new friends. And in doing that, I probably would have kept playing or played at an even higher level. But yeah, I wish that I kind of had that advice. I would just say absolutely go for it. And the friends that you'll meet and the people you'll meet will stay with you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely, that's great. Obviously, someone who's sort of been there and experienced it, it's always helpful for people to hear that. And tell us about sort of Yeovil, how things got on at Yeovil for yourself. What's that experience been like at Yeovil?
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I'm loving it. So I signed last season, and we were in contention to being promoted to the Women's Championship, which is the second tier in the UK. Unfortunately, with the whole coronavirus, the league was expunged by the FA, and so our points don't matter, and we'll have to start again next season. But looking positively at that, we'll use that as a motivation and really recuperate this summer. But it was a really, really good season. We started to pick things up kind of after Christmas, and we had a lot more positive results after that. So we were going in the right direction. But the professionalism that the guys at Yeovil create, and the club environment, the team environment, and the passion that's involved there is second to none. It's fantastic. It's one of the best clubs in the National League, and it's been in the Super League before. It got relegated down to the Championship, and it's been in the Championship, it's been in the National League, and the following, the fans that we have at Yeovil are fantastic, and you couldn't wish for a kind of a better environment and better team, better coaching staff to be involved with.
Yeah, and say the gap between, say, the tiers. I mean, what's your assessment in terms of the gap between the Super League, the highest tier, and the other tiers? What's your sort of take on that in terms of the sort of gulf? Is it sort of closer than, say, in men's football, say the Premier League and the Championship, League 1 and 2? What's your sort of take on women's football? Just so our listeners got an idea of the sort of. I know it's hard to every team's different, but as a general rule, what would you say the gap in sort of standard is in women's football?
I think the Super League are worlds apart, to be honest, from the Championship and the National League, and that's mainly to do with the players are full-time, so they get a massive professional contract, they get all their support, all their psychology, all their nutrition, they live at the complexes, they train every day, so there's a massive difference between the Super League and then the Championship. So the Championship teams, there's only a couple that are full-time, so you can tell the difference there already. These players play on a part-time basis, they have jobs outside of football, they train 2 or 3 times a week, and that's the same with the National League below. So between the National League and the Championship, especially the top teams in the National League and the entire Championship, there's not a lot of difference there. The teams then in the Super League, as you step up to Tier 1, it's astronomical. The support that they get is absolutely fantastic, and they're full time, like I said. So the Women's Super League is the top league, obviously. Then the Championship and the National Leagues, there could be a lot of movement there, depending on who gets promoted and relegated, and any team could kind of compete. But in the Super League, you have to be full time, and you have to have a lot of money behind you. A lot of the Super League teams have men's teams behind them that are supporting them as well, which is helping. In the Championship, there are not too many men's teams supporting those women's teams, and in the National League there are even less. So you've got clubs that are affiliated with their men's teams, but the men's teams won't let them play at their ground. there's not that financial support there. They can't use the same sponsors and things like that. So it's very separated, and that lack of support then translates onto the pitch, and these players can't be full-time, so there is a gap.
That's really interesting stuff. And just in terms of, say, like in the men's games, there's academies and centre of excellences. Is that the same in women's football too, where at the highest level, or at what level do you have that sort of infrastructure where you sort of start from an early age and sort of like a pyramid to get to the first team?
So to get into the championship, so to be promoted from the National League, which is tier 3, into the championship, you must meet criteria, and one of those criteria is to have an academy set up, a centre of excellence. So if you do not have that, you can't be in the championship. So that's where it begins. Now, that's not saying that any of the National League teams don't have centre of excellences, because a lot of them do, but it's not compulsory to be in that league. Into the championship, as you go up, it is compulsory to have a centre of excellence, and they run them brilliantly, fantastically. We're bringing in a lot of foreign players now to the Super League, so I would like to ensure that the centre of excellences and the players involved there are getting opportunities to then progress to the first team. But as money gets pumped in, it's obviously going to be the fact that we go out to foreign countries and bring back these international stars that haven't gone through the centre of excellence systems. But in the championship, where there's not that much sponsorship or money or full-time players, these centre of excellences are so important, and the rate that these players are coming through is fantastic, and it's what we want to see.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is there an opportunity for like teams in the championship to test themselves? Like, say, for example, in the men's football, you've got the FA Cup. Have you got anything where it's possible for like the teams in different tiers can play against each other?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a Conti Cup, which is where the Championship and the Super League teams compete against each other. So those top two tiers during that Conti Cup play against each other. It's like a knockout round. So it's like a group stage and then knockout round. So you have the opportunity to play against each other. Also, we have an FA Cup. So the Super League and the Championship don't come into that until rounds later. So if you make it through, so if the national team leagues then make it through to those rounds where the Super League teams come in, there's an opportunity there to play against those teams. There was a case this year where Ipswich Town made it all the way to later down the road and played Manchester City away at Manchester City ground, which was absolutely fantastic. And Ipswich are a National League team, and they had that opportunity. So there is that scope there for National League teams to compete against the Super League teams. But I think the score on that day was 12-0 or something. Wow. So that just the gap. However, they brought down 3 bus loads, 3 coach loads of fans, Ipswich down to Manchester City, or up, I'm not sure, up to Manchester City.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it was fantastic. So that event for Ipswich Town Football Club, even though, the score, I don't think they were going there expecting to win. Obviously, they trained really, really hard and wanted to win, but that gap is just way too big. But yeah, so we've got the Conti Cup and the FA Cup. Other than that, the leagues are separate.
Yeah, and that's a great opportunity for players to test themselves and have that sort of aspiration. And you never know, also maybe even get spotted as well by one of the professional teams as well. There's always an opportunity too. In terms of your own vision for Yeovil, what's the vision going forward there? I mean, obviously at the moment there's no football for the foreseeable future, but as and when we get back to football again, where do you see things going there? What's the sort of vision there, Jordan, with Yeovil?
Yeah, we brought in Jamie Sherwood. So Jamie Sherwood was the manager when the Yeovil were in the Super League in 2014, and he's an absolutely fantastic manager, and he's brought me in last year. He has the same vision. He wants to get Yeovil back to the Women's Super League, and so every player that he's bringing in there, every coach, every player, all the fans, we all have the passion and the desire to want to get back to the Super League. So that's the aim. Obviously, we have to hit the Championship first, but looking into the future, the long-term aim is to get back to the Super League, and they have that infrastructure. They've, a really, really cool guy called Adam has come in and bought the club, and he's fantastic. Mm-hmm. He's bringing in lots of sponsorships for us, and the whole thing is way more professional than it was maybe 2 months before Jamie had come in as a manager. So the desire there and the vision for the future is to be back in the Super League where Yeovil Town belong.
Absolutely. And what would it mean to say Yeovil in terms of the town itself and in terms of participation, if Yeovil could get back into the which I'm sure you will, with people like yourself on board, what would it be like in terms of the impact it would have around the town itself and the area for younger players? Would it inspire a generation, do you think, of younger players to think, okay, and more people to come and watch the games as well?
Absolutely. I mean, Yeovil get already in the National League, they have the highest attendance rates. So we have absolutely fantastic following. And that originated from Yeovil being in the Super League in 2014. We've kept the same fan base. And so all these young girls are still aspiring to be Yeovil Town players. It doesn't matter what league we're in. Obviously, if we were in the Super League and we're playing against Manchester City, the likes of Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea's, I'm sure these girls would continue to come. And yes, there would be more coming, but the support that we have already is fantastic. And what we're doing for the youth game, we have really, really good youth teams as well. So we start from, I think it's under 12s, under 14s, under 16s, and then we have the senior team as well, and we have the Bridgewater Academy team. So there's a whole pathway there for girls coming through at Yeovil, which is absolutely fantastic. But yeah, like you said, for us to be role models, we get fan mails and things like that from some of the young girls, or they ask us to have their photos with us at the end of the games and autographs and things like that. We're quite an inclusive club, so we like to interact with the fans, and we do hope that we inspire lots of young girls to be playing football and their parents to bring them along to games every Sunday and things like that. So yeah, we're really, really keen on inspiring the next generation, and definitely by being in the Super League, that will help us to do that. But like I said, being in the National League, the league is quite professional. It's not professional, but it's run in a professional way where the games are at stadiums and things like that. So bringing girls along to that is fantastic.
And how often do you guys train a week, Jordan? What's the training like?
We train twice a week. So we have two sessions a week and one game day a week. That's our structure. But with those training sessions, we have kind of video analysis sessions, we have nutritional advice, we have gym sessions, and we have out on the pitch sessions, and we have tactical sessions. So there's a lot in common. We have kind of like 4-hour training sessions twice a week plus a game.
If you went professional, would that sort of be full-time training, or if you sort of managed to get to the top league, would that go full-time, do you think? Or
yeah, that would look like probably 2 training sessions a day with maybe 1 rest day and game day on a Sunday. That's the difference. So these girls are, it's hard being in the National League in terms of getting your gym programs right and things like that. There's a whole lot of work behind the scenes that go on outside of the scheduled training sessions, because these teams in the Super League, they have time to do, I don't know, gym on a Tuesday morning and then training in the evening. So it's all split up so that they're not over fatiguing and rushing through the gym programs just to kind of get them done. There's a whole structure there, and unfortunately in the National League we don't have the luxury to be full-time and to be looked after 24/7. So we have to make sure that we're looking after ourselves as best as we can away from the club.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And in terms of, say, from a national honours point of view, what would it sort of mean if say, for example, someone at Yeovil was, went and played for the national team, if they could get through and play for England, for example, would that make a big impact on the game itself in the area too?
Yeah, absolutely. We have at Yeovil, I think we have 8 Welsh or previous Welsh internationals, which has been fantastic, and the following that we have from that is great. But also the training programs that they get from their national team setups are fantastic. And so it would be the same thing if any of our girls were to progress through the England ranks. The support that they would get through that as well would be fantastic in terms of the gym programs they could have, the rehab they could get. Yeovil provide all of that stuff anyway, but if they could progress through the England ranks, then for the club that would be absolutely fantastic.
And just out of interest, you mentioned Wales. I mean, sort of what level would Wales be for our listeners from the point of view of football? I mean, the men's team obviously has done really, really well the last few years, and we've seen some great performances. In terms of the women's teams, where are they at the moment in terms of the standing on the world stage? Just curious in terms of where they are. I think sort of going forward and developing in the women's game.
Yeah, it's grown massively over the past 2 years. It was the last European campaign. I think it was the European campaign. It all came down to the last game in the qualifier stages, and it was England against Wales, and England managed to beat Wales, but Wales, that was the closest Wales have ever come to qualifying for a major tournament, which was unbelievable and unheard of. And 10 years ago, you would probably never have even dreamt that Wales would be anywhere near that. But the starting 11, I think for the first time, the entire starting 11 of the Wales team in one of the current European qualifiers were all Super League players, and that's the first time that's ever happened. We have a lot of Welsh internationals that are in the National League and in the Championships, but now there are more and more pushing for, and all these young ones coming through to play in the Super League. And so again, that's the difference between the Super League then and the Championship and the National League underneath. But Wales has come such a long way, and we're currently in a qualifying campaign for another major tournament that we're doing really well in. I'm not sure if we'll qualify because of obviously this pandemic. I don't know when the games will go ahead or what changes will be made, but that's something really, really to look forward to. And the crowds that we're getting at Wales as well for international games is huge. Before we were playing at kind of, I don't know, not in front of not very many fans, and now we're playing at kind of Rodney Parade and selling out, and we're playing at the Cardiff City Stadium. We're playing at Leckwith and selling out, and so that for the female game and youth players coming through, that it's something to really, really aspire towards.
That's interesting stuff. And in terms of I just had a thought there, and our listeners are probably welcome to sort of send a message in for our Facebook, the Friday Sports Show page. Is perhaps they could do like a home nations. I'm not sure how the fixture congestion would cope with that, but perhaps you could have, say, the likes of Wales, England, Scotland. Northern Ireland, for example, maybe having a tournament. Is there scope for maybe sort of, because the thing is, when you have the international set up, it really brings things to life in a big way. It's like the World Cup, the European Cup. Do you think there's maybe scope in the fixture? I know there might be congestion, but what's your take on maybe having something like that, Jordan? Like maybe like a home nations tournament.
I really like that. It would be quite similar to the Six Nations in rugby, right? And I think that would be really cool. I mean, we try and fixture in as many friendlies as possible in the international schedules, and to have a tournament like that would be unbelievable. It will just be more fixtures for these girls and these players and these teams to get experience and to practice as a team together. It's a lot about preparing for tournaments maybe in 3 or 4 months with limited games in between. So if we were to have a home nations tournament, I could only see that as a positive, providing that it fits in with the league schedules and things like that, because you don't want to be playing too many huge international tournaments out of season with clubs. But if it fitted in with the calendars, I don't see why not.
And the intensity would be amazing too. I think that in terms of that rivalry, I think that we see in the rugby as well. It'd just be amazing if that sort of gets translated across and across to the game as well. I mean, for me, I sort of think back to the Olympics in England in GB in 2012, and I went to watch a couple of women's games. And I think that the game had sort of come a long way at that point. The likes of Canada and America as well, that was strong, and some really strong teams. But looking at things now, it seems to sort of come on leaps and bounds as well too, even further than that as well in terms of going forward. I mean, how far can it go, the game, do you think? Will there be a point, do you think, that is it sort of realistic to think that maybe there'll be a point where it does attract as many people coming to watch the game as the men's game? Is that maybe is that realistic, do you think, in the future, Jordan, that it can get those sort of crowds consistently?
I honestly hope so. I do think that there is potential for that. Right now, there's not, because there are too many people that talk negatively about women's football and that they don't take it seriously. And those are going to be the people that stop young girls from playing football, or that, make international players feel really, really rubbish about a performance they had one time, and it's going to really, really affect their mental health. So these kind of things need to stop in order for that to happen. But in the future, there's so much positivity, and we're not talking in the next couple of years, but I really, really think that in I don't know, 20 years' time, it could be where the men's game is at right now in the UK. There's a lot of work that needs to go on behind the scenes. We need to really kind of think about restructuring and giving these teams and these clubs the possibilities and the support they need to do that. But if these men's teams are, reaching these kind of fan bases and things like that, there's no reason why the women's game can't do exactly the same.
Yeah, and you make a really important point there. I think that it's a great point you've made there about how it can affect people, and obviously negativity. I'm all for everyone having an opinion. Obviously, they can have an opinion on what their thoughts are about performances in the game. But I think what's really important is the point you make, the way and when people sort of speak in maybe a negative, derogatory way, it's not great. And I think I always say to people, just think of how they would feel if someone had commented that way, their daughter, their sister, someone in their own family. I think that it's people, in terms of football or any sport for that matter, opinions are important. We can talk about the performance of the game and that sort of stuff, but there is that sort of fine line that's really important too, because obviously it has many benefits in the community too, and getting people involved in sport is a huge thing, and football is a great sport because you can just get a ball and kick it around and you're on the way. It's not a huge expense to just play the game, even just kicking the ball about, really. And do you think it's really important that sort of people do get behind, young people who are just trying to make a go of it and just enjoy the game and sort of do the best they can? I mean, what's it mean to you when people do encourage you, Jordan? Does it just sort of give us an insight in terms of the encouragement? How do the young players feed off that when they do get encouraged?
Yeah, it makes such a massive difference. And I think you touched on a really interesting point about the fact that, sorry, I can't remember what you said. You talked about that
sort of fine line between performance, speaking about someone's performance and sort of being personalising it. And it's not nice to... I mean, I would say personally it might be an undercurrent of people, but there's enough out there, I think, and that's across a lot of sports as well. But like you says, I think it's really important to think when someone does leave a comment to think how would they like it if someone did it to their child, to their...
Absolutely. And as a female footballer, or as a footballer in general, that, or we're quite accepting of the fact that if we do have a rubbish game, people are going to comment. That's fine. The men's Premier League players get that too, and we're accustomed to that. But what we can't deal with, or what we shouldn't have to deal with, are people making derogatory comments or comments about us playing just because we're females, or more extreme than that. That's when it becomes a problem, and that's when we can't be saying to our daughters or our nieces or our friends, you have to deal with that, because you shouldn't have to deal with that. Yes, okay, if you have a rubbish game, you should be able to deal with, and you should be mentally strong enough to not let that affect you. But in the grand scheme of things, if these comments aren't to do with performance, then they shouldn't be happening at all, really, especially in 2020. We've come on leaps and bounds since the days when women weren't seen as equal parties to men, and now these comments are still happening, and it's rife on social media, where these people are coming out of the woodwork and saying some crazy things, and like you said, if somebody did say that to your daughter or your your niece or even your mum, you wouldn't like that, and they shouldn't have to deal with that. But going back to your point about encouraging girls and things like that, and they see these things on social media, and I hope they don't look at it and think, well, I don't want anybody to ever talk to me like that, and let it stop them from participating in women's football. But yes, I think that encouragement they have, and we always, in women's football, people can't reply to every single message, but we're usually really, really good at interacting with fans and engaging with fans, and signing autographs and taking pictures with them and replying to messages or sending them signed shirts and things like that. It's a very inclusive and fan-based game, and we do that because we want these young girls to feel like they're a part of something, and that they can be involved, and that they can get to where we are, and that we see them and we hear them, and we're really, really grateful of their support, because 5-6 years ago we never had that, so we are really, really grateful. The men's game, they're all used to that. They you get some really good ones who do interact with their fans, but you get others that just want to play football and go home, which is fine. But in the women's game, we really, really appreciate the support that we get.
Absolutely. And one thing that sort of struck me, I've got very limited experience of women's football, but one thing that sort of struck me is in the women's game is that, particularly the ones that play outside the professional league, the sort of work that goes into it. A lot of them have got jobs and they're sort of backing up on training, and they really are making a huge effort to sort of keep things as professional as possible in terms of their training and their scheduling and the games as well. And it's not easy in the sense that obviously after work to sort of go to training, and then sometimes it can be, it's an outlet in some respects too if it's been a stressful week too, but equally in saying that, I'm sure sometimes it's like, okay, they may have had a hard day at, say, maybe exams at university that are due, or they might have, a tough day at work and that sort of stuff, and they're really trying hard to make training as professional as possible. Is that a challenge, you think, in terms of sometimes combining work as well with, or study with football too? Jordan?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I think it's also a challenge for the coaches to realise this, and the training regimes to be adjusted to this, because we think about football and what we need to do to create better football players in general within the clubs that we're working with, but these we need to realise, and these coaches do realise, that these training regimes need to be adjusted based on what day we've had. Some of us, we've got at Yeovil, we have personal trainers, we have office workers, we have people that are in the army, and so every day the personal trainer is going to be doing 3 gym sessions during the day before then coming to training. Now, me working in an office, I don't do that, so then I have to work harder in the evenings at training to be at the same level. So it's really hard to create an environment where everybody's getting the same exposure to training, because it's not always that viable. In the Super League, where they're playing professionally and they're with each other every day and they're getting paid to be there, they don't need to have part-time jobs. They get exactly the same support. They get they know when they're training, they know that their bodies should be reacting in a certain way, they know that they should be fatigued maybe on a Monday morning after a game on a Sunday. Yeah. And so they can plan their week based on that. But in the National League, working and training is really difficult, but also mentally as well. You finish a really long day at work, and then you have to go and train, which you love going to training, but maybe you've had a day of being really busy, and then you can't switch off in the evening to refocus for training. So that is a huge challenge. But yes, I'm really lucky at Yeovil, and they really try and support all these different types of jobs that we all have, and I hope that all the other National League and especially in the Championship as well, I hope that they're all doing the same to support the girls to be mentally and physically prepared for games on a Sunday.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And so, like, in terms of you had experience of being out in America and here as well, I mean, is there an opportunity maybe for like the universities here, the colleges here, to maybe have programs where, I mean, that was sort of the platform, I guess, for America in one sense, and that would be an option to pretty much train full time and study as well. And I mean, is that something that sort of, what are your thoughts on that, Jordan, in terms of maybe, I mean, I suppose in general, university sport in general in the UK isn't probably on the same level as in America, in the sense that sort of provides the athletes there with a pathway to the very highest level. There's different pathways here, but could that be an option, do you think, maybe in the future, where university football has an opportunity for people to get scholarships like they do in the States as well, or?
Yeah, I think, in the UK we have tried to do that. Yeovil have a program, a university program. They have a college program as well that kind of links into the football club. So if anybody wants to study at the same time, then they can have that. I mean, Durham do the same thing, where they've got a joint program where you can play for their Super League team and study at the same time. And they seem to be working really well. Durham are doing superb this season. So that works really well. I think that the only problem that we have are that these major teams might not be in an area where there are university courses, especially in sport or anything else. So yeah, if we were to do that, we might have to restructure kind of where these teams are, or what universities we think they can kind of partner with. But yeah, I don't see why that kind of shouldn't happen, because I think it's really important, and I think everybody in women's football does know the importance of making sure you have an education at the same time, or before or after you're competing. But yeah, so I went to the University of Bath, and And I found it hard to kind of find the balance between training, socialising and studying at the same time. If I'd have been in a programme where I was studying and playing full-time football, I probably wouldn't have socialised in a way that would maybe compromise my training. But that opportunity wasn't there for me, and in the future I hope that it will be, because that pathway needs to be clearer from under 12s going through the ranks to then study at university and play full time. That will kind of be the complete package that we'd have. But it's really, really important that people get an education as well as maybe not to the degree of university, but make sure they go through school and have that support, maybe a college that supports their full-time program training wise as well.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I think it's really important, and it sort of opens up new avenues too. And I think that's for anyone in any sport. I think men and women. I think it's really important they sort of carry on learning something, because obviously sport, irrespective of what level you play, it is short-lived to a point, but also moving forward. And what's it like, say, for example, I mean, I've sort of spoken to people across different walks of life in sport in general, but what's it like, say, for a footballer who sort of comes to the end of their career in women's football, Jordan? I mean, what happens then? I mean, I've talked to many athletes, and they talk about how it's a bit of a struggle in terms of their identity, being in a sport. In terms of women's football, what afterwards? What's the sort of pathway? Is it coaching? Is it what sort of generally happens then?
Yeah, we have lots of people going into coaching after they retire, but there's also a big culture for punditry as well. So there are lots of female players that are now retired that have gone into the world of punditry and kind of sports journalism, which is really cool. So you're still kind of seeing them on TV, which is kind of what we need, because we were kind of stealing the men's pundits before. But now that we have our own retired players that are coming through and still wanting to be involved in the women's games and grow the women's games, you have kids looking at, say, Alex Scott on Match of the Day and thinking, that's exactly where I want to be, or she's a woman footballer. Phil Neville did a great job as well when he's been on Match of the Day a few times, and now that he's the England women's manager, people associate these people with women's sports. Yeah, and that's exactly what we need. But there could be more support for these girls coming out of playing and entering retirement. But coaching, people are doing their coaching licenses as they go through and as they're playing, so that when they finish playing, they have that to fall back on. There are only a certain amount of coaching roles, obviously, so not all of them can go into professional coaching. But a lot of them are then going to coach the youth teams and things like that, to try and inspire more girls with their experiences to progress. Yeah,
that's really interesting. And I mean, you mentioned Bath there, and their sports facilities have, to my knowledge anyway, have always been pretty good and in general. But I suppose that in that area, my understanding is sort of rugby area around sort of. Yeah, am I right in saying that sort of rugby is sort of dominates in around there, or what sort of the stature of football around there? And just sort of for our listeners' curiosity, and I guess my own really, because over here it's like a hotbed of football, and everywhere you look it's sort of, there's a football team. You got United, City, Salford obviously is sort of going through the leagues as well with the investment they've got. But what's it like around Bath in terms of football, the stature of football in general?
Yeah, it's a massive rugby area. Like you said, they've got Bath Rugby that play there, who are fantastic in their league, and they play against Exeter Chiefs and all that in their league. So Bath is majority rugby based. You're right. In terms of football clubs in Yeovil, in Bath, they've got Bath City Football Club, who play in the conference leagues. So they get a good following, but from people in Bath. But in terms of women's clubs in Bath, Yeovil would be the closest one, and it's still so. I used to study at Bath, and I have to travel 1.5 hours to get to training at Yeovil, and then 1.5 hours back, and even further for game days if they were at Dorchester. So that's kind of, you have to be willing to travel to play at the professional level or the national or the championship level in down south in Somerset.
Yeah,
there's not really many clubs that you can have access to. Again, which comes back to the point of if Bath were to create kind of a full-time programme with a club, they would have to start a Bath City women's team, which would have to start in the lowest leagues.
Of course, yeah.
Unless they had enough money to apply to be championship status, which would be unlikely at that stage. So that's where that barrier kind of comes in.
That's really interesting stuff, and how that works. And in terms of the Yeovil, the men's club, I mean, do you sort of guys watch them as well, or keep an eye on their sort of results, or how does that generally work in terms of? I mean, obviously at Man City, you mentioned earlier, they're sort of quite close. I'm pretty sure the women's team train in the same. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they train in the same training complex. Is there sort of opportunities there maybe to sort of like work together at some point, or?
Yeah, so we're associated with the men's teams. We have a different badge, so we're kind of a different identity.
Okay.
But we keep in close contact with the Yeovil men's team. Now, in 2014, they actually allowed us to play at Hewish Park a few times, and I know that in years after that, Hewish Park was their home ground for the women's team, which was absolutely fantastic, and the crowds that we brought in at that stage were brilliant. It makes it a lot of difference playing at a big stadium where, fans can get, hot dogs at half-time or have, entertainment. Yeah. And things like that. The whole game day experience was really, really cool. Now we don't play at Hewish Park. I think I would hope that next season, or maybe the season after, there would be scope for us to do that again, providing that we would have to prove that we could bring in enough numbers and fans to make it kind of worth it for them to let us use that pitch. But that would be absolutely fantastic if we could do that. But yeah, we have a good relationship with the men's teams, and they've been known to support us in the past. So hopefully they can do the same in the future.
No, that's really good. I think that's really important. I think both can bounce off each other. Really, I think that there's room for sort of both teams to do well. I think it creates a buzz in the city and in the town, and I think it's really great for any city to have sort of teams and sports people doing well on every level. Really, it's a massive boost. I think it's a really, really, like you mentioned before, playing at a stadium, it brings a really big buzz as well. But also on match day too, I think it's really really, really important in terms of match day. It really creates a great vibe. I think there's a great place to be on match day in the UK when everyone's sort of excited. And so did you guys play on the weekend, on Saturdays or Sundays, just out of interest, as and when we get playing again? Yeah.
We play. Our game days are on a Sunday, so sometimes we have midweek games. If the season is behind, or if we need to catch up on games, we might play on a Wednesday or a Tuesday evening. But the majority of games are organised for a Sunday. But like you said, with the big stadiums, for a player as well, for me, playing at a stadium like that, it's fantastic. It really, really motivates you, and with the fans behind you, it creates that experience for you and that motivation for you as a player as well to really want to do well. When you're playing on a pitch that's maybe fenced off, or it's right next to a tennis court or things like that, and you get maybe the odd parent standing around the game.
Absolutely.
You still love the game, you still love playing it, but there's no sense of I want to do this for the fans, or I want to really stand out so that the fans say, oh, well done. That's what makes it all worth it. And to be performing on a pitch with a big stand and on a stadium pitch, it really adds to the motivation and the professional level of the game, and it makes you feel like you're part of something really, really special.
Absolutely. I really want to thank you for coming on board the show, Jordan. The time's gone really, really fast, and it's been really informative. I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed it. I've certainly learnt a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have listened in and got a lot from it. Do feel free to email us on the Friday Sports Show, the Salford City Radio Friday Sports Show, 94 FM Facebook page, any sort of questions or comments. But Jordan, that's been really great speaking to you. I wish you every success, and no doubt we'll sort of keep an eye on how your sort of career and your pursuit to get in the top league of women's football works out. So thanks again, Jordan, for joining us. It's been a really great opportunity to speak to you.
You're so welcome, and if any of the followers want to follow me on Twitter or anything like that, any of the young girls that are interested in playing, or want to ask any questions about what it takes to kind of get to the top, then please feel free to message me, and I'll try and get back to you all.
Thanks, Jordan. Great.